Let's talk about nuclear weapons. Just 9 countries in the world have them. And only the US has ever used them in war, when it bombed the Japanese cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945.
Over 70,000 men, women, and children had been killed in a moment.
For a while, especially after the Cold War, there was a big push to stop the spread of nuclear weapons and cut stockpiles. But now, nuclear-armed states are building up their arsenals, and other countries are reassessing their nuclear strategies.
The world is now re-nuclearizing in, I think, a very dangerous way.
Proliferation, meaning more countries trying to get nuclear weapons, is definitely a possibility that is knocking on our front door.
But what determines which countries can have nuclear weapons? Why would a country want or not want nukes? And is the so-called global nuclear order at risk? To understand what the global nuclear order is, let's go back to October 1962.
Cuba became the focus of world attention.
It was the height of the Cold War between the US and Soviet Union, and American spy planes discovered that launch sites for nuclear missiles were being built in Cuba.
Follows the shocking discovery that Soviet Russia is converting the island into a ballistic missile base.
In response, US President John F. Kennedy ordered American warships to intercept Soviet ships thought to be carrying nuclear weapons on their way to Cuba. The Soviets called that an act of aggression, and for 13 days, the world feared that nuclear war could break out at any moment.
Suddenly, millions of Americans are asking one question: how can I make my family safe?
In the end, the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved through diplomacy. But it highlighted just how dangerous a world with nuclear weapons could be and led to a global effort to try to limit that danger. And that's how we ended up with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, known as the NPT. It came into force in 1970.
I only hope that those of us who were fortunate enough to be present will look back one day and see that this was the first milestone on a road which led to reducing the danger of nuclear war.
So the global nuclear order has many different pieces, but the centerpiece is the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
This was sort of a deal, a bargain between countries that had nuclear weapons and countries that didn't have nuclear weapons, where the countries that didn't yet have them, they promised never to get them.
But they needed something in exchange, right? And that was a promise by the nuclear weapon states to gradually work towards nuclear disarmament.
Now, almost every country in the world has signed up to the NPT. There are 191 signatories in total. 5 of them are nuclear-armed states: the US, Russia, China, the UK, and France. They had all tested nuclear weapons before 1967, and under the treaty, were allowed to keep them. But then there's the handful of countries that are not signed up. North Korea was a member, but withdrew in 2003. India, Pakistan, and Israel never signed. And all of those countries have nuclear weapons. So that's how we get to a total of 9 nuclear-armed states. Keep in mind, though, that Israel doesn't openly admit to being one.
It follows a policy of nuclear ambiguity, where they don't advertise or talk about their nuclear weapons, but also don't actively deny it.
We've seen many documents declassified over the years that show that Israel has nuclear weapons.
Now, the NPT's main focus is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, but it does allow countries to develop nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. Nuclear power is a major one, but there are also plenty of other uses, from medicine to agriculture.
All of that is allowed under the treaty as long as it does not lead to development of nuclear weapons.
And it's the job of the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, to carry out inspections to make sure that's the case. It's thought of as the world's nuclear watchdog. So the NPT partly explains the nuclear landscape we have today. It provides an international legal framework, although, as we've said, a few countries are not signed up, and any member can always leave it if they want, although that would probably lead to other consequences, and we'll come back to that. Ultimately, the decision each country makes about nuclear weapons comes down to a mix of factors, and their calculations can change over time. One major factor is that it's really hard to develop this technology, and it's really expensive. You need the scientists, you need the nuclear fuel, you need the infrastructure to actually make a nuclear bomb. You also need the missiles or planes to carry the weapon.
The good news, it's very complicated to build nuclear arsenals. You need to build really complex nuclear weapons design that requires special material, extraordinary fine-tuning of how they perform, and then of course be able to handle the radioactive materials and in just the right way and set it up in a nuclear device so that it actually works. And doesn't just work in the laboratory, suppose, but it works if you put it on the top of a ballistic missile and shoot it, several thousand kilometers away.
Security is another big consideration for countries or governments that feel under threat, because nuclear weapons can be seen as the ultimate deterrent. It's the idea that if two sides have the ability to destroy each other with nuclear weapons, neither will start a nuclear conflict because it would guarantee their own destruction as well. And this concept has a name: mutually assured destruction.
So think of India and Pakistan. These are two nuclear-armed rivals. They occasionally have border clashes or there are acts of terrorism. But so far, since 1971, they've avoided a major conflict, in part because of the risk that it could escalate to the use of nuclear weapons, which of course would be devastating to both countries. So theorists argue that some spread of nuclear weapons has actually been stabilizing because it's made war among great powers much less likely. Now, of course, this stabilizing effect may not apply if there's a much broader spread of nuclear weapons.
More countries with nuclear weapons means more fingers on the nuclear button, more scenarios or situations in which nuclear weapons could come into use. That is never good for anything.
Another part of a country's security calculation relates to its political alliances, because alliances can provide protection without the need for a country to develop its own nuclear weapons. You may have heard of the US nuclear umbrella. It's basically a security guarantee the US gives to some of its allies that it will respond to major threats on their behalf, including, potentially, with nuclear force. The umbrella covers South Korea, Japan, Australia, plus all members of NATO, so that's 31 other countries. But right now, some of these countries are questioning whether they can still rely on this protection. Because President Trump has created a lot of uncertainty by sending mixed signals about how far the US would ultimately go to defend its allies. France has raised the idea that it could use its nuclear weapons to help create some kind of European security guarantee. We've also seen the UK recently make plans to beef up its nuclear capability. Now, another factor that countries weigh up is whether having a nuclear weapon might affect their status or standing in the world.
In the immediate period after the Second World War, all of the victors became permanent members of the Security Council, so the US, Soviet Union, UK, France, and China, and all of them saw their status as great powers could be enhanced by the acquisition of nuclear weapons.
You could argue that the 4 other countries that got nuclear weapons since then and are outside of the NPT have seen their status and power enhanced too. Take India, for example.
The Indians see themselves as a great power, and they want to have nuclear weapons just like their Asian rival China.
But there are also potential political and economic costs to consider. If a country decides to go against its NPT commitments not to pursue nuclear weapons, or if it pulls out of the treaty, that can lead to heavy sanctions and international isolation. That's basically what happened to North Korea. It's got dozens of nuclear warheads, but it's also seen by much of the world as a kind of pariah state.
It's quite a big decision to develop nuclear weapons. It's a message to your neighborhood, a message to the world about how you see yourself, and involves also significant costs. So it's not a decision that is easily made.
This brings us to Iran, which is a complicated case. It's a member of the NPT, and a lot of experts, including the IAEA, say there's no evidence of a secret nuclear weapons program. At the same time, Iran's been doing things that have raised suspicion.
Iran has quite an advanced nuclear program, one that they are at pains of saying and repeating is just for peaceful uses, although others contest that and push against that.
Iran's nuclear program has been a big focal point for diplomacy and political negotiations over the years. In 2015, it signed a deal with 6 world powers, where it agreed to restrictions on its nuclear activities and stricter inspections. In return, international sanctions that were crippling Iran's economy would gradually be lifted. But that deal essentially fell apart after Trump pulled the US out in 2018, and Iran started to ramp up its nuclear activity again.
All the negotiations around Iran's nuclear program, or at least a big part of them, was to how to constrain that program and make sure that these enrichment activities are constrained at a certain level that would just feed into a peaceful nuclear program and not go all the way up to the high enrichment levels needed for a weapons program.
Earlier this year, the IAEA said Iran was not complying with its commitment to international nuclear safeguards, and that it had significantly increased production and accumulation of highly enriched uranium.
The Iranians have gone up to 60% enriched uranium, which has no civilian use under their program.
Keeping people guessing about their intentions might have been part of the Iranian strategy, while some experts have concluded it was about gaining leverage for further negotiations.
Started the higher level of enrichment more as a bargaining chip to put on the table to raise the price of a new nuclear agreement.
But in June, Israel attacked Iran. Israel hit military and nuclear facilities and killed several leading nuclear scientists. Iran says more than 1,000 people were killed. Iran hit back with strikes on Israel. 28 people were killed there. The US also got involved, striking Iran directly for the first time ever, dropping huge bombs on key nuclear sites. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu initially said that Israel launched the attacks because Iran's nuclear program presented an existential threat.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year. This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival.
But Netanyahu has also been talking about bombing Iran for years, and there are other factors that may explain Israel's motivation and timing for these attacks. Check out our recent episode if you want to know more. But all that aside, what impact did those Israeli and US strikes actually have on Iran's nuclear capabilities? Well, President Trump initially said Iran's nuclear program had been totally obliterated. The US Department of Defense later said the strikes had set the program back by 1 to 2 years. But we still don't know what happened to Iran's stockpiles of highly enriched uranium.
اینا ورودی‌ها رو زدن، اونا رو زدن. ولی اصلا توان هسته ما در فردو و نتنز و در جایی که اینا زدن در اصفهان که نی. در اندیشه و مغز نیروهای انسانی ماست.
On the medium and the long term, strikes like that highlight Iran's vulnerability and give voice to groups within Iran to make the case that they actually need nuclear weapons. So in a sense, such strikes can be counterproductive if they push a country to want nuclear weapons more. And if they want nuclear weapons more, they can build bunkers deeper than the ones bombed. They can take the whole program underground.
So where does this leave things now? Well, Iran has again denied that it's seeking a nuclear weapon.
اعتقاد نظام و جمهوری اسلامی این که ما نباید سلاح هسته‌ای داشته باشیم. سلاح هسته‌ای یک در حقیقت ابزاری وحشی و ناآگاه که تر و خشک رو با هم میخواد بسوزونه.
But Iran also says it will continue its uranium enrichment program within the framework of international laws. President Trump has said he won't allow that and has threatened more attacks.
We wiped out their nuclear possibilities. They can start again. If they do, we'll wipe it out faster than you can wave your finger at it.
Now, as we said, Iran is a complicated case, and it's linked to all sorts of other dynamics that are playing out in the Middle East. But it does raise a lot of questions about who gets to police the global nuclear order. And that also comes back to politics.
The idea or the goal is to have rules that apply to everyone and that are implemented fairly But, everyone knows that we fall down on that.
And if we're talking about the risks of having more nuclear weapons in the world, it's not just about new countries acquiring them. It's also about what the existing nuclear states are doing. Remember, 5 of them are signed up to the NPT, so they're supposed to be working towards nuclear disarmament. But they're actually doing the opposite. They've been increasing their spending on nuclear weapons in the last few years. If you then add what the non-NPT states have spent, it comes to more than $100 billion in 2024. And the US spent more than all the other countries combined.
Right now, there are no pursuits in good faith of nuclear reductions negotiations.
Now we see trends with Russia developing all new kinds of nuclear weapons. The US is putting old designs back into the system, like sea-launched cruise missiles.
It's now become clear that China intends to build up its nuclear forces to levels similar to the US and Russia.
But if this all feels very bleak, then keep this in mind too. The vast majority of countries don't have and don't want nuclear weapons. And however imperfect the current system is, it remains the case that there's been no use of nuclear weapons since the Second World War. Some of the rules around nuclear weapons are based on international law. Watch this explainer to understand how all that works. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss our next episode, and follow me on Instagram and TikTok so you can stay up to date with all the stories we're working on.